Let me just welcome you and say good morning. I'm Mary Ann Holak, and I'm the director of the Senior Center in the Beverly Council on Aging. And it's great to have such a wonderful turnout for this event. And we have our board members here today, so thank you, board members, for being here. We have Bruce Doig, who's the Director of Community Services and Parks and Recreation for the city, and lots of wonderful partners in the community, people from the Y and from Beverly Hospital, from Bootstraps, from Hawk. I'm sorry if I'm missing anybody. Our Beverly Public Library partners are here, so thank you so much. And of course, we have many of our wonderful seniors who use our building every single day. So welcome, and I'm really excited to have you here. And I see that Mayor Cahill just came in too, so welcome, Mayor Cahill. So this morning, an inspirational quote popped up on my cell phone, and it went something like this: "We can't stop the waves, but we can learn how to surf." And I think that's a pretty good way to describe life and also the aging process. We surely can't stop the advancing of the years, but we absolutely can learn how to embrace our age and stages in life and find new opportunities for joy if we only take the time to learn how to surf through the waves of each new decade of life. Of course, I believe that is the exact purpose of the Council on Aging and the Senior Center. We are here to provide older adults with programs and strategies to master their age and stage of life, and to also provide support and resources to those who have perhaps been knocked off kilter by a wave due to an age-related challenge. So we're really excited that we had an opportunity with funding from our state formula grant to engage UMass Boston Center for Gerontological Research to do a community-wide needs assessment during just about the past year almost. We started, I think, last July. And so Caitlin Coyle is here today to present some of the findings and results of the needs assessment survey. And then our next step, of course, is to figure out where to go from here. And so at the end of her question and answer period, we hope you'll stay for a few minutes and answer a few questions for us where you think you'd like us to go from here. And Mayor Cahill is here. Would you like to say a welcome, Mayor Cahill? You're going to be a participant. Okay. Well, welcome, Mayor Cahill. Thank you for being here and supporting all of our efforts. Okay, so Caitlin Coyle has been the lead researcher, Dr. Caitlin Coyle from UMass Boston. Welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me in the back there? All right. Thank you to Mary Ann and to Jessica. I'm very excited to be here today to present the results of the community needs assessment that we did for the city of Beverly. One quick logistical thing, I don't have a clicker, so I'm going to be advancing my own slides, so I'm going to be doing a little bit of a shuffle up here, so just bear with me. So I'll first start by telling you a little bit more about myself. I'm a research professor in the Gerontology Institute at UMass Boston. I received my PhD in gerontology in 2014. I did 2 years of a postdoctoral fellowship in public health at the Yale School of Public Health. And I have come to UMass Boston to work in the Center for Social and Demographic Research on Aging. And much of the work that our center does, we are a public university with a mission towards service for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We do a lot of these individual community needs assessments for cities and towns across the state. So we've been around since 2012. Since then, we've worked with over 30 communities in Massachusetts, helping them plan for the aging of their population. So that is, so one of the communities that we've worked with obviously is Beverly, and what I'll do today is talk a little bit about the scope of the project here in Beverly in terms of what are the things that we did. I'll give you just a little bit of the key findings. I will say that the final report is close to about 100 pages. So I will not be able to share every detail with you, although I'm sure it's all very interesting. I'll be sort of trying to touch on the high points. And I'll end with a set of recommendations based on the findings of that needs assessment for the city of Beverly and specifically the Council on Aging in terms of things for them to think about as they plan for the future. So the scope of the project was really to investigate and to document the future needs and preferences of Beverly seniors. The primary focus, as I say, was on the senior center, but we certainly know that for people to age successfully in their communities, we have to look outside the senior center. We have to look citywide. We have to look at the community as a whole to understand how residents can age successfully. So while the primary focus is on the Beverly Senior Center, we also have a secondary focus that focuses on features of the community more broadly. So in terms of what we did, we first put together a demographic profile of the city of Beverly with a specific focus on the 60-plus population. These data came from the US Census Bureau, specifically the American Community Survey. And that was really to help us get a sense of who are the people that live here in terms of how old they are, how much money they make, that kind of thing, really trying to put a profile to the Beverly senior. We also did a resident mail survey, so some of you may have received a survey in the mail. We did a random sample survey, so we took a random sample of residents age 60 and over. Each of those residents, there was 3,000 residents in that sample. Each of those 3,000 residents were mailed a postcard to their home. A week later, they were mailed a survey, and that survey included a self-addressed stamped envelope for people to return to us at UMass. We heard from over 800 residents age 60 and older here in Beverly, which got us a response rate of about 27%. I usually tell folks that a response rate of 20% is acceptable, and so 27% is great. So really, we were happy with the response that we received. You can see that in terms of who we heard from, 45% of the sample were age 60 to 69, 35% were in their 70s, and 20% reported being 80 or older. So we actually had a pretty fair distribution in terms of the age breakdown of the people that we heard from, and it actually lined up pretty well with that US Census data in terms of the age distribution here in the community. In addition to that, we did 2 focus groups over last summer. Those focus groups included residents. They also included what we call community stakeholders. So these are people who provide services to seniors in Beverly, who have sort of interaction with older residents in the city. I think one of the struggles with these projects is that we know there are seniors in our communities that are isolated and perhaps frail and are not able to leave their home. Those folks are less likely to return a survey. They're less likely to come to the senior center, perhaps, for a variety of reasons, but it's really important that we hear from them. And so what we do in this situation is we try to invite people to these focus groups who may be able to speak on behalf of some of those seniors. So people who deliver Meals on Wheels, people who provide home care, so that we can really try to ensure that we're hearing a holistic voice of the seniors here in Beverly. In addition to those 2 focus groups, we also did 5 key informant interviews, so actually sat down in person with 5 of the leaders of the community here in Beverly. This included Mayor Cahill, and included the city planner, the president of the city council, and the chiefs of police and fire. One of the things we've learned in our work is that second to the senior center, the folks in a community that are most affected by population aging, a lot of times are those emergency response departments, fire and police. So they have a lot of usually really great things to say and a lot of insight to the issues facing seniors. So now I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the findings. I'll start with some of the demographic information. So this slide that you see here is the population in Beverly age 60 and over looking back, beginning in the year 2000 and looking forward to the year 2030. In Massachusetts, we have 4 sets of projections available to us, 2 from the Metro Area Planning Council, the MAPC, and 2 from the UMass Donahue Institute. What you see here are the 4 of those projections together so that you can see sort of how they line up. Because we know projections are not perfect and we can't predict the future, I think it's important to sort of see the range of possibilities in terms of what the population 60 plus is going to look like here in Beverly. So what you see is back in the year 2000, there were about 7,600 seniors here in Beverly. If we look out to the year 2030, the projections show somewhere between about 10,600 and 12,000 seniors here in the community. So you can think, looking back, in 2010, the 60 plus group was about 8,000. It made up 21% of your population. And if we take the middle of the road projection and that 2030 figure, that will be about 28% of your population by the year 2030. So really looking at a growth in the senior population regardless of which projection you follow. I will also say that in order to do the mail survey, we obtained the city clerk's list from the city census. And then in the year 2017, when we pulled that list, there were about 9,100 seniors here in Beverly. So if we look at what the projections say, we're actually pretty much on track in terms of the growth, given the local numbers here in Beverly. This next slide is also, it's taking one of those middle of the road projections, sort of not the highest and not the lowest, but one of the two in the middle, to show you how the senior population growth stacks up to the other age groups here in Beverly. So what you see is that top blue bar is your total population in Beverly, and it's generally relatively flat if we think about the overall growth of the population. But when we break it down, the blue bar is the under 60 population. And you can see that that's relatively flat in terms of the residents here under age 60, hovering around that 30,000. So still a huge part of your population, but sort of relatively stable. But when we break it down by that 60 to 79 group or the 80 plus group, we see certainly some steady growth in that red line. The red line beginning with 6,025, you can sort of follow it over and you sort of generally see growth in that population. The same is true for that 80 plus population. So really when we're talking about the age groups in Beverly that are growing, we can certainly think about seniors as part of that. And the reason for this, you probably know the answer to why this is happening, but part of it is, folks are living longer. People are living healthier lives. We've got the baby boom generation that's certainly aging healthier, living longer, and people want to stay in their communities. People are staying in their homes, they're staying in their communities much longer than they have in the past. And the combination of that results in many more seniors staying in their communities. So next I'm gonna talk, this is still sort of that demographic information, just a couple of quick results from that profile. We found that a large portion of homes in Beverly are owned by residents 60 plus. So if you look at that owner occupied bar down there, the bottom bar, 39% of homes in Beverly are owned by people 60 and over. This is important, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, because when we think about what it's going to take for seniors to age successfully in Beverly, we have to recognize that many of them live in homes that they own, and that has implications for their needs and their ability to stay safely in the community with regard to things like home repair, home maintenance, and things like that. In addition, we heard from the survey, so this is the survey that over a quarter of homeowners that responded to the survey indicated that their homes needed modifications or repairs in order for them to age in place. And a small portion, about 10% of those people who said, yes, my home needs a repair or a modification, said they were unable to afford those repairs or modifications. So again, when we're thinking about what is it going to take for folks to be able to age successfully in Beverly, I think recognizing this issue of home ownership, it also has financial implications, obviously, in terms of people's assets and their wealth. Having a home, owning a home but not having much income has implications for sort of eligibility for programs and things like that. So again, I think an important thing to keep in mind. We also learned that 1 in 3 Beverly residents age 60 and over live alone. We also heard in our qualitative conversations, both in the focus groups as well as in the interviews, a need for continued outreach and awareness of seniors who we think are at risk. Now, living alone certainly does not put you in that at-risk category immediately, and it certainly doesn't mean that you're socially isolated. But I think it's an important thing to think about as we think about people's accumulation of risk for isolation later in life. So living alone, being unmarried, not having family nearby, things like that, with age over time can accumulate into risk. And so it's important, I think, to note that 1 in 3 Beverly seniors live alone. When we look at the older age group, that 75 plus group here in Beverly, we found that over half of them reported having at least one disability. So the definition of disability used here is really around sort of just ability to do activities of daily living. So people's ability to walk a couple of blocks, cook for themselves, things like that. And so over half of residents in Beverly 75 plus said that they had at least one difficulty with some of those activities. Again, when we're thinking about the needs of a community and how do we support residents living here, I think it's important to note that there is a significant portion of older residents who have sort of mobility limitations. And so thinking about how to support them being able to continue to participate here at the senior center, as well as participate in the community more broadly in terms of accessing transportation, walking, that kind of thing. So knowing that we've got at least a portion of our residents who are experiencing some difficulty is important. So switching to the survey results, so that mail survey that I described to you earlier, one of the things I think we heard loud and clear, Beverly seniors are committed to staying here. People like it here. Over 3/4 of survey respondents reported having lived here for more than 25 years, so lots of longtime residents. And 62% reported that it's very important to them to remain in Beverly as they age. In addition, we heard that 32% of seniors who said that if they had to move because of a change in their health, they would seek out a senior independent living community here in Beverly. And that's the kind of housing that they would be interested in. More specifically, among those who are 80 and over, so that oldest old group, they actually would prefer, 30% said they would prefer an assisted living here in Beverly, but people want to stay in the community. So again, I think we hear the term aging in place all the time, and a lot of people sort of make the assumption that means living in my place, in my physical home. But I think what we heard here is that it's really about aging in community, and that people are wanting to stay in Beverly and they want to stay in their community. We also heard, 81% of respondents said they agreed or strongly agreed that older residents in Beverly are treated with respect, which I think is a wonderful thing to hear as a community, that people generally feel that seniors here are treated with respect. And again, I think contributes to their reasoning for wanting to stay. We asked survey respondents about the things that concern them, the things that concern them about being able to stay. So we just heard about how people want to stay. That's a priority for them. But we asked them, okay, so what are the things that make you concerned about your ability to do that? The number one reason we heard about, probably unsurprising to many of you, nearly half of residents said that the cost of living is something that concerns them about being able to age in Beverly. The second most reported reason was having a lack of family nearby. So 39% of our survey respondents said that not having family nearby is something that concerns them about being able to stay here in the community. And the third most reported reason was a lack of affordable housing. So if we think about some of the needs for seniors to be able to live successfully in a community, we've got cost of living, social support, and housing. And those are some pretty basic needs when we think about what we know about successful aging. So I think that those are very important, and certainly something to be thinking about as we think about how to make Beverly a place for people to be able to stay as they get older. We also asked folks about their experiences providing care to someone in their family or to a friend. So we asked, have you in the last year, so the last 12 months, so this is a recent experience, provided care or assistance to someone you know who's frail or disabled? And this is by age breakdown, so the blue bar there is the people in their 60s, and the red bar is the people in their 70s. And we heard is over a third of respondents reported that yes, they have provided care to a family member or a friend in the last year who was frail or disabled. So when we're thinking about the people that live here, how they spend their time, we know caregiving can consume a lot of time and a lot of energy, as well as a lot of resources. And so to know that a large portion of your residents are doing this work is important, I think, especially as the senior center thinks about how do we engage with residents that perhaps are not already participating here. Of those people who said that they provide care, we asked them how challenging it was for them to provide this care and also meet their responsibilities of their own daily lives. And you can see that more so among the younger residents, you have over half who said it was very challenging or somewhat challenging, but overall, more than a third of folks said, yes, I provide care, and yes, it's very difficult for me to do this and to provide and to meet my responsibilities in my daily life. So again, I think an important thing to think about when we think about the seniors here in Beverly and how they're spending their time. We asked folks if they participate here at the Senior Center, and the graph you see here is by age. So the lower left there is the folks in their 60s, and it goes out on the right there to the folks in their 80s. So we said, have you participated in the Beverly Senior Center? This can be even if you just go a couple times a year. So we're not taking into account the frequency in this graph, but you can see that just about 20% of folks in their 60s say, yes, I've participated at the Senior Center at some point. And you can see that that steadily inclines over time with the age groups, with more than 60% of the folks 80 plus participating here. So I think this is important because I think this points to one of the challenges that senior centers all over the state and probably the country are facing, which is that you are working to meet the needs and the interests of a very wide range of ages. Talking about people in their 60s and people in their 90s and what they'd like to do, how they'd like to spend their time, what they need from a community in order to age successfully is very different. They come from different generations, they have different expectations and different preferences, and it's up to the senior center, I think, to balance those priorities, which can be a real challenge. And that's certainly the case here in Beverly. For people who said they did not participate in the senior center, we asked them why. This graph shows you, again, it's broken down by age. So that yellow bar is the folks in their 80s, the red bar is the folks in their 70s, and the blue bar is the younger folks, the folks in their 60s. By and large, having a lack of time and a lack of interest were sort of the most commonly reported reasons why people don't participate here at the senior center. You can see among the folks in their 80s, I'm not interested was the most frequently response. And for folks in their 60s, so that youngest age group, their most commonly reported reason was that they don't have time. We also know many of the folks in their 60s are still working, and that has huge implications for their ability to participate in things like programs at the senior center. In addition, you can see that a large portion of people wrote in something, so that other bucket down there towards the bottom, you have quite a few people who wrote in, they told us. They didn't like our options, so they told us why they don't participate here. And so we dissected all of those write-in responses, and what we heard a lot were people telling us about why they don't have time. So talking about caring for family, talking about working, talking about being involved in other things. We heard some people talk about not knowing what happens at the senior center and that uncertainty keeping them from participating. So for example, someone said, I don't know what programs are available, I don't get the newsletter. There was also another sort of frequently written in response, which was people saying, I don't need the senior center. That's why I don't go there. I don't need it. And I think this kind of speaks to one of the other perhaps misconceptions of the senior center is that you have to have a need to come here. And that it's not just a place for people to be social and to engage with their residents and their peers, that you have to demonstrate some need in order to come. So that was some of the other reasons why folks said they don't participate here at the senior center. We asked people if they've experienced, when they do try to participate at the senior center, if they've experienced any barriers, any things that have made it challenging for them to participate here. And what we heard was that 1 out of 5 survey respondents reported that they don't know what programs and services are available at this Beverly Senior Center, and that's a barrier for them to participate here, is they're not even sure what goes on. And that's particularly true among the youngest age group, that 60 to 69 group. You can see down there towards the bottom that blue bar that sticks out. That is not knowing what programs and services are available. So again, I think this is important when we think about how the Beverly Senior Center can plan for the future and think about how do we educate the coming seniors about what happens here and how to get involved. We also asked survey respondents about what types of programs and services are important to them. This figure here, this table shows you we compared people who say, yes, I use the senior center versus people who said, no, I don't use the senior center, and we asked them, what are the things that are important to you? So what you see, if we look at just the people who say, Yes, I participate at the Senior Center, and these are the things that are important to me. Their top priorities in terms of programs and services included professional services, so things like health insurance counseling, legal and financial advice. They also, over half, talked about fitness activities, so access to things like yoga and exercise classes. That was important to them. And transportation was the third most commonly reported program or service that was important to folks who are currently participating. If we look at the folks who are not participating here and what their priorities for activities and programs are, we see kind of a similar pattern. In fact, professional services and transportation were also in their top three, and the exception is that they also reported assistance with local or state programs and physical health and wellness clinics as being very important to them. But I think the overall sort of takeaway from this is that we know health and wellness are very important to seniors here in Beverly, as well as access to transportation and professional services. So as we're thinking about planning for the future and what kinds of programs people are seeking, I think it sort of hangs around these sort of general themes of health and access to professional services, including transportation. So with that, I'm going to pause and just find out if anyone has any questions about the results before I get into the recommendations that we've made. Okay. So again, those were just sort of some of the highlights of the findings from the report. There's many, many more points that I could tell you about that I think are really very interesting, but I think that gives you a little bit of a flavor for what we found. And based on those findings, we've made a set of 9 recommendations. And the way these recommendations really work is that they're intended to be a path forward. They're intended to be, these are some things for the Senior Center to think about, these are some things for the city to think about, and we give some examples for how they might go about thinking about those things. Certainly this is not prescriptive in any way, but I think it is important to note that, both giving you some priorities for planning, but also some ideas for how you might put some of those plans into place is really the purpose of these recommendations. So the first thing is to plan for the growth of the older population here in Beverly. So we saw that very clearly, that group here in Beverly is growing, and it's expected to continue to be a significant part of the population. And so in terms of planning for that growth, many of the recommendations we make in the report, and one of the general recommendations that we make, is that the expansion of the capacity of the Beverly Senior Center is very important in order to meet the needs of this growing population. And so really thinking about the capacity here at the Senior Center in terms of staff, their ability to respond to those needs, particularly around the interest in sort of professional services and things, transportation, things like that, making sure that they have staff available to support those programs, and also the outreach piece. We heard that people may not really know what's happening here, and I think some effort to really trying to spend some time thinking creatively and strategically about how to market the Beverly Senior Center is important, but all of that requires additional capacity. So one of the sort of thoughts for thinking about the future is to consider the creation of an additional outreach position that focuses on communication and marketing of the Senior Center and the programs and services throughout the city. We also, the second recommendation is to strengthen community knowledge about what the Beverly Senior Center is and its range of programs and offerings. So this really speaks to the idea that we heard folks tell us that they didn't know what happened here, and that was both a barrier for them to participate and also something that keeps them from really being fully engaged in their community. So we talked about developing ways to engage new Beverly residents, both renters and owners, and helping them learn about the Senior Center. So establishing a welcome committee that welcomes individuals both to the city, but also provides them with knowledge and information about services and resources at the Senior Center. Also talked, some of the other examples included things like providing an incentive for first-time users at the Senior Center, having somebody here at the Senior Center to welcome folks on their first day, providing some incentive for current participants to bring new friends to the Senior Center. Again, I think word of mouth is one of the more powerful ways for people to be educated about what's happening in the community, and certainly something that we can think about. The third recommendation that we make is to improve communication between the senior center and other city departments. So one of the things that we know is, and I've already sort of alluded to this, that it's not just the Beverly Senior Center that's going to be impacted by population aging. Population aging will impact all parts of the city, all city departments, in some ways directly and in some ways indirectly. So it's important for those city departments to be in communication with the Beverly Senior Center and be educated about the Beverly Senior Center, as they are the hub here in the community for seniors. Specifically, we heard about the need to develop some mechanisms by which departments like the police and fire can communicate with the Beverly Senior Center, particularly around vulnerable seniors. So again, I talked about in the beginning that the fire and EMS folks and police are oftentimes sort of the second beyond the senior center, some of the more, the folks who have more direct interaction, particularly with these vulnerable seniors. So it's very important to think about the current mechanisms for communication and how can we ensure that those are the best mechanisms for communication. How can we make improvements to ensure that vulnerable seniors in the community are known about by the senior center and the fire and EMS and police, so that they can certainly work together to support those residents. We offer the suggestion. We know there are models popping up in other communities of how cities and towns are responding to this issue, so perhaps inviting some folks from other cities and towns to provide information about their models is one way to get started. The fourth recommendation is to support older residents' efforts to stay in their communities. So as we heard, people want to stay here. They may want to stay in their homes, but more importantly, they want to stay in Beverly. So how do we support them in their efforts to do that? And one of the ways I think that the senior center and the city, generally speaking, can do that is to advocate for improved housing options for older adults who cannot stay in their current homes. So one of the sort of more specific ways, we can talk about housing and developing new housing and affordable housing and accessible housing, which we know is difficult to do. We know it's happening anyway, but that's certainly one avenue, is to create more housing options for people. I think the other way to think about it is, we know all of those, we talked about how many homeowners there are here in Beverly, particularly those 60 plus, making sure that they have access to information and to programs and services to help them make those repairs and modifications to their homes to make them safe places for them to age. So making sure that they have information about the types of adaptations that could be helpful to them, how to finance those changes that are needed to their homes, and find trustworthy sources of assistance for things like handyman services and contractors. One of the other ideas that wasn't on my slide, but something that I think is in the report, is related to providing perhaps a workshop on home ownership in later life, and talking about sort of what are my options in terms of how do I access my home equity to help think about planning for the future for my home. And so convening some kind of public workshop for folks to come and learn about some of those various options is another suggestion perhaps for the senior center. Moving on to the next couple of recommendations, we've got improving education about transportation. So we heard, transportation is very important to people in Beverly. It's one of the programs and services here at the Senior Center that people talked about being very important to them. We also heard about in our interviews and in our focus groups that transportation obviously is something that allows people to age in place, age in their communities. If it's not being used by the folks here in the community, we need to think about how we can make improvements to that. And so one of the recommendations is to simply improve the education about local options available to older residents in Beverly. So we actually did have a survey question about how much people use the public transportation here in the city. It was very low. So we heard from people that transportation is very important to them, but we also heard that people aren't necessarily using the public transportation for seniors that already exists. So this recommendation is really to think about why that might be happening, and to take some effort to make sure that people know about the transportation options that are here, how to use them, how to access them, and also to work with other city departments to improve the ways of promoting these options that are already in place so that residents and their families know what's available. So for an example, to review all of the signage and the seating at the local bus stops to ensure that they're sort of age-friendly, so that that information is available to folks who are trying to use that public transportation. In response to the finding about caregiving, we offer the suggestion to consider new ways of supporting informal caregivers in Beverly. We know the Senior Center is already a source of information and assistance, but it can expand what it does, particularly around the issues of caregiving. So some of the examples are to provide a resource fair for caregivers, so bringing in some of these folks who are providing care to the Senior Center to help them learn about what already exists in terms of their support. There's lots of, some other communities are doing things like a caregiver's night out, where they can provide some respite for those folks and offer them an evening of dinner and music, just kind of blow off some steam and get a break. But really, I think that was a significant finding for us, and so to think about how does the Senior Center take a look at what it's already doing for caregivers, how do we make that more well-known, and what can we do to expand that programming? And the last set of recommendations includes strengthening opportunities to connect older residents with existing resources to improve economic security in Beverly. So we heard cost of living is a concern for people and their ability to stay here in Beverly. And so we offer the suggestion to advocate for new resources and programs to support economic security in Beverly. For example, this is related to that Aging in Place workshop that I already mentioned, but really sort of talking about how people can use their home equity to age in place, as well as alternative housing models like home sharing that might offer a senior both somebody living with them, but also some extra income. I think the other place here that we talked, some other recommendations that are in the report are related to the tax work-off program, making sure that that program is expanded so that more seniors can take advantage of it, and also to think about the kinds of positions that are available for seniors here in Beverly in terms of what kind of work that they can do. We know that not all seniors are physically mobile, so thinking about making sure that there are tax work-off positions that allow people who are perhaps less physically mobile to participate in those programs. To address the programmatic factors that limit participation, so we're talking about sort of how to draw more residents to the Beverly Senior Center. We offer the recommendation to consider hosting events at different spaces throughout the city so that more residents can get some visibility about the Senior Center if they're not necessarily feeling comfortable coming into the building, that they might familiarize themselves with the Senior Center at other locations and understand that the Senior Center is more than perhaps the stereotype that they think it is. We also heard a lot about sort of this vulnerable group of seniors here in Beverly, the folks who perhaps are not here at the Senior Center and perhaps homebound, and thinking about how do we expand offerings for these folks in Beverly. So exploring the use of technology in order to engage these folks. So things like phone, friendly visiting by phone. There's a lot of sort of senior centers who are exploring providing activities by video or over television so that folks can tune in and be part of a conversation. So we suggest looking into some of those ideas as well. So with that concludes sort of the recommendations portion, and I'm happy to open it up to thoughts, to comments, to questions, reactions, things that surprised people, things that confused people. Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh. Sure. Yes. So that question was about the availability of the report being made available online, and the answer is yes, that report will be made available online for people.
Question about transportation.
Yep. Thanks,
Olga,
Jessica.
you shouldn't have done that.
You might not be able to get it back.
Anyway, in transportation, two things. I'm in between cars now, so I'm taking the shuttle bus a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they have a lift on the back of the thing so people wheelchair bound can ride up.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing they have is damn difficult to surmount set of stairs in the front. There are two words: kneeling buses.
Mm-hmm.
Can these be provided? And I recognize that's a take-home question, but
Yeah, but I think
urge people to give it a thought.
Yes, absolutely.
Get this out of my hands.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, so that, I think your comment about transportation is well taken, and it certainly speaks, I told you that we asked survey respondents about their use of some of the public transportation, and it was pretty low. And if we think about accessibility and those barriers, that's certainly one reason why people may not use it, if they're not able to access the physical bus itself. And so I think your suggestion about kneeling buses for that shuttle is great. Thank you. Okay, you're open to counter proposals. Absolutely. We've got a question in the back there.
Hi, good morning. I'm curious from your recommendations, how much of what you've recommended represents sort of a refocusing or reallocating of existing resources, to better improve utilization and things like that, versus how much of what you're suggesting is actually requires an infusion of new resources for the center?
Sure. I think it's got to be a combination of both. I mean, I think certainly some of the immediate response to some of these recommendations is sort of a refocusing of some of the things that already happened, but certainly as we look to the future and we see the number of seniors that will be here in Beverly, and we understand their preference and their need for sort of things like information about programs and supports and services that are available to them here in Beverly, but also at the state level, that certainly will ramp up demand here at the senior center. And I think certainly they have, I think, 3 full-time staff that are, that have actually sort of that professional background to provide that kind of information and services, as opposed to other folks who are doing, providing the transportation services and things like that. So certainly I think maybe in some of the more immediate response, it can be a bit of a refocusing, but certainly looking to the future, that would require an expansion of capacity. Other questions? Mayor Cahill? Yeah.
Thank you. Do you mind going back to the slide, Beverly Seniors Committed to Aging in Beverly? I had a question on that. Sure. As you're doing that, thank you so much for all this work and for the presentation today.
Absolutely.
This is incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
I guess it's the second bullet.
Yep.
32%, so about a third of our seniors who responded to the survey saying that if they needed to move from their current home, they would seek out senior independent living community. Could you define senior independent living a little better? And also, what did the other 2/3 have to say, or did they not really give more detail on that question?
I actually have that in my notes. So in terms of the definition of senior independent living community, I think that's an important question. Essentially, it's a fairly broad bucket of housing type, but it essentially means housing for seniors, so sort of, you think about like a 50-plus community. So it doesn't have services necessarily embedded there, but has the opportunity for folks to bring services in. And it oftentimes includes things like townhomes or apartments, a smaller, more downsizable type of. Okay. Yep.
Duties and things, and
Yep.
yeah, I'm starting my second year there this month, and I'm extremely happy living there. And yeah.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of people share that thought, and that they would like, if they're not going to be in their current home, they'd like to be in a place where they have some independence, but also have a more manageable sort of space. And so certainly it's related to that independence piece, so senior independent living. So we're not talking about assisted living where there's sort of supports already in place, and we're not talking certainly about any kind of nursing level care, but it's really that a place for seniors that they can bring some services in if that's something that they need or like. I'm trying to find I know for certain another third said they'd like to stay in their home, into a single family home, I should say.
Hi, my name's Kate Lashinsky. I'm the resident service coordinator at Turtle Woods Apartments in Beverly, and I work for Harbor Light Community Partners, which offers housing for low-income seniors. And a lot of people don't know about us, some people do, but what's really, really nice is that we support the independence and aging in place. People come in 62 and up, and Turtle Woods is coming on its 20 years, so we have people that have lived there for 20 years. And they have their own apartments, and I bring services in confidentially at their request for homemaking, personal care, Meals on Wheels, the whole thing. But what's really nice is that if you want to live there and you're just you're working in the community, taking care of your families, volunteering, stuff like that, you have the privacy and of just a regular apartment building. But as you get older and you get more needs, you have more needs, we could bring that to you so that you don't have to go outside of the facility unless medically necessary. But it seems like from the survey that housing is huge. So if support Harbor Light Community Partners.
Thank you. Yeah, and just back to that point, so it was 29% of the, so in terms of the other 2/3, 29% said they would prefer a single-family home, a smaller single-family home, and about 20% said they'd like an apartment or a condo that's in a complex with 5 or less units. So talking about sort of not necessarily those big apartment places, but that would be sort of how other people responded.
Hi, my name is Susan Feeney, and I'm just curious how Beverly stacks up against other cities and towns in Massachusetts.
Well, that's a good question. I can't speak necessarily for all the cities and towns in Massachusetts, but I can say, yeah, certainly. I mean, I think when we ask the question sort of what does it take for a community to be age-friendly, what does it take for a community to be a place that supports seniors as they get older, some of the things like housing and transportation are just going to be common in all of those places. Those are just sort of basic human needs in terms of people's ability to stay. But I think what's specific about those two things in particular is how those things are provided. So for example, the transportation here in Beverly struck me as being something a little bit different than some of the other communities that we work with. A lot of times when we talk about transportation, we hear about a lack, just a sheer lack of transportation, I should say. So people talking about there just isn't transportation. If I don't drive, I can't stay here. And here in Beverly, that's not necessarily the case. You know, you have access to some of the MBTA services, you have a local shuttle, you have taxis available to you. So in this case, transportation still arose, I think, as a need for the community, but it took a little bit of a different shape in terms of it's not necessarily about a lack of transportation, it's about how do we make the transportation we have more well-known to people, more accessible to people, so that people can actually take advantage of some of those resources. Yes.
Yes, my name is Walt Kosmowski. I'm the Executive Director of BevCam, and we've been working with the Council on Aging here for at least the last 11 or 12 years, and the seniors have come in, a special group have come into BevCam, and they've been taping a show called Living the Good Life for at least 10 years. They've taped 100 shows. They're only one of 3 producers in our studio that have taped that many shows. We've also been in this facility dozens and dozens of times taping events like we are taping this event today, workshops and seminars on every conceivable thing that might interest seniors. We have bulletin board items which the senior center can send directly to our bulletin board. Our admin just simply checks it for typos, what have you, and that's run all the time about your trips and events and all that other stuff. And the one, I noticed there was one point about seniors who may not be mobile and may be homebound. And so we can certainly work with the senior center and increase the number of programs that we do in this facility, yoga or whatever it may be, and broadcast those on our channels so that the seniors that are homebound can watch that. So.
Yeah, thank you, Walt. That's a great idea. And I think the other point that you make, and back a little bit to the previous question about sort of common, you know, how Beverly stacks up to other communities, one of the things that always surprises me is no matter how small the town or how big the city, and we've worked with the city of Boston and we've worked with lots of small towns out in Western Mass, this issue of communication comes up in no matter the size of the community. People don't feel like they necessarily know what's going, you know, they want to look for this one place where they can find everything that's going on in town. They want to know all of the things that are happening, and they feel like they don't have that information. And that's, I think, probably a little bit of a combination of a need from the sort of how information is provided to people, but also how people receive information. We did ask in the survey about how people prefer to get information specifically about the senior center, and by and large, folks said that they like the newsletter, both printed and online, as a way to get information about the Beverly Senior Center. But I think that issue of communication, both from the senior center out to the community, but also amongst, we talked a little bit about communication amongst city departments, always an important, very important thing to think about when we're talking about seniors. We're not talking about a group of people who are only getting their information from email, like many of us do. We have to think about multimedia. Yes.
I'm not going there. I'm not old. That's a large number of my friends and family. And I talk about how many options there are and how many wonderful programs.
Mhm.
I'm not old and I'm not going to hang out with those people.
Yeah.
Some of them are older than I am.
That's right. That's right. I think that's a great point, and it came up. We touched on it a little bit. People talking about I don't need the senior center. I only people who need it go there, kind of thing. It really speaks to sort of this more general perception of aging that I think we as a society actually have. It's not just here in Beverly, but how do we overcome that? How do we engage folks who say I'm not old, I'm not going there, and there's nothing you can do to get me in the door? I think there's a couple of ways to do that. One, we talked in the very beginning about some new marketing, sort of thinking about there's a kind of a bit of a movement, AARP is leading it right now, called Reframing Aging, sort of just kind of redefining what it means to be an older adult and what it means to age. So thinking about sort of drawing on some of that more national information and how do we market here in Beverly, the senior center, and how do we rethink the marketing of the senior center. I think the other piece is, and I talked a little bit about this sort of incentivizing new people to come to the senior center. People like to be invited. People like to be asked by a friend. People like to feel like when I go there, it's not going to be high school all over again, or I'm not going to, sit alone at lunch, that kind of thing. There is a bit of a fear, especially, whenever you're transitioning in life, whether you're transitioning from elementary school to high school or from retirement into, from working into retirement. I think there's a bit of an uncertainty and a bit of a fear, and so I think trying to address people's discomfort is another way that we can do that. So thinking about ways, how do we get people comfortable with the senior center? Maybe they don't want to come to this building, but maybe we could provide an event at a restaurant or something like that to help them learn a little bit more about what happens here, get them familiar with the services and the people, and then maybe they'll come through the doors. But certainly a great point and a tough nut to crack. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Jason. Oh.
Let me give you a mic here.
Sorry.
How about the senior center establishing a newcomers lunch or breakfast where people that are already in the senior center are encouraged and have the incentive, because they could also come to the lunch or the breakfast, to have more people come to the center?
That's a great idea, Mary, and I think it's actually already in the report as one of my suggestions, but I think that that's a great idea. Again, back to this idea of people feeling personally invited and feeling like I have someone who wants me to be there. And a newcomer's breakfast is a great way to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. My name's Jason. I work for Senator Joan Lovely, and I just had a couple questions. So first, kind of from a facility standpoint, you talk about about expanding services and programming. Can the facility, when I'm in this building, it's busy, and there are a lot of people here for a lot of the programming that exists currently. I wonder if there's enough facility capacity, never mind staff capacity, to kind of host those the types of programs that you'd like to expand. So I'd be interested to hear about that. I came in a little late, so I may have missed some of this, but was there any consideration for a kind of built-in infrastructure within the city in terms of, conditions of sidewalks, time it takes to cross streets, ramps, even design of future development and housing buildings that accommodate, folks that are aging. And lastly, I just want to put a plug in for the Senior Tax Workout Program. I'm psyched that you mentioned that, and I think there are huge opportunities to expand that.
Thank you. So to your first point about the physical capacity of the senior center here, so there were no direct questions on the survey about that, but we did hear about it in a couple of ways. One, when we asked about barriers to participation here, we heard a little bit in some of the write-in comments about parking, particularly for larger events, people not being able to find a place to park to come to those events. We also heard about some of the classes, I think particularly some of the exercise classes being very full and not having sort of room, and so that can turn people off to participating. And so we did hear about some people's, that barrier as being potentially something that keeps people from participating here. And certainly as we're looking forward and talking about demand and continued growth in that senior population, that's a natural need, perhaps. And then to your other point about, what was your second question? Oh, right. Yep. So again, one of the things that sort of stood out to me, and I don't know that I made it on a slide because it's one of the many interesting things that couldn't be on a slide, was we asked people about how do you get around Beverly? So it was kind of in the vein of transportation, but we said, how do you just generally get yourself around town? Most people said they drive themselves, but I think it was something like 20% of people said they walk. And so we think about that and think about what we know about baby boomers and about people who are becoming seniors and even current seniors. You know, they're living healthier lives. They want to be out in their community. They want to be active and physically active. And so walkability, I think, is a huge need in a community. I mean, for any community, for people to be able to walk safely, whether that's the condition of the sidewalks, the amount of snow removal that's done or not done, that kind of people's feelings of being safe. We did ask people generally feel very safe here in Beverly, which is not surprising. But so anyway, I think that piece of walkability, it came up there as well.
My name is Vladimir Misa, and I am a member of this senior center here. I am Albanian, and pardon for my English, Now, first one, I wanted to say is, please, can you take a seat and sit down, because I have 1 hour staying straight up. It's not good. Yes, take seriously.
Thank you. Thank you. I had a nice sit on my over an hour drive from Boston this morning, so I'm actually feeling really great being up and about, but anyway, I appreciate it.
And the second one, shortly, since I followed and appreciate this kind of inquiry, I like to express the opinion of Albanians, means newcomer. Mm-hmm. Since the domestic language is difficult for them, especially in written and written way, I think that would be advisable that Garden City newspaper, means the newspaper of our senior, that is very good newspaper, mm-hmm. to have at maximum 1 page in newcomers language. There are not only Albanians, mm-hmm. there are a lot of, but that must be, how can I say, approach, mm-hmm. invite them to look at the information in their own language.
Yes.
Must be useful, I think.
Yes, I agree with you. And like I said, we asked people, how do you like to get information about the senior center? And it was very clear that the Garden City, that newsletter was the way that people want to get information about what happens here. So thinking about the accessibility of that for folks with whom English is not their first language, I think is a very important suggestion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have to thank you. Please follow my first advice.
Thank you very much.
Caitlin, I just want to say Vladimir helped us translate the survey into Albanian, and we were able to get some of the community to fill it out in that way. So thank you, Vladimir.
Thank you very much, Vladimir.
I think David had a question on this side, and then...
Oh, me again. Okay. To sum up some of the things that have been said here, especially this lady's my front, I think the town could benefit greatly by having a sort of welcome wagon. Updated, of course. But we had one when we first moved to Braintree, 87. A nice lady came around in a wagon and gave some starter gifts to people and
sure.
things like that.
Yep.
And that would be a good vehicle, I would suggest, for someone knowledgeable in the senior center and its features and benefits
yep.
to come along with that welcome wagon.
Yeah.
Maybe this one person could do it all, or maybe a committee would be the way. But I urge people here to give...
Are you signing yourself up for that committee? I think that's a great idea, Dave, and I think that Mary had the same idea, this idea of a welcome wagon, and as a newcomer yourself, I'm sure you can speak to that need. I think one of the challenges or things to think about with that is sometimes those welcome wagons are open to folks who are homeowners only, so people who've recently purchased a home in Beverly, that's how they get on those radars, and we know, especially for seniors, that some of those folks might be renting, so how do we ensure that they have access to it as well?
Okay, a good way to start would be voter registration listings. People move to town would normally, at least the people I think we're most interested in, mm-hmm. would register to vote, and that would be a good place to start. Not saying a limit, but a starter.
Yep, great. So welcome wagon to town to kind of get oriented sort of to the things that are available here. And Mary was talking more specifically about here at the Senior Center, some kind of welcome newcomers breakfast as a way to welcome people here at the Senior Center.
Thank you, Dave.
Sorry.
You don't have to.
My name is Delva Bent, and I'm a senior here. And what I would like for the senior center here to do is to make sure that they go around to some of the senior who has their own home, the elderly, check if the house is safe for them to live in. If they have handles in the tub, handles in the bath, and the floor is safe. I live in Dedham, and they always do that before I move to Beverly. And that is very essential. You can't be going into a tub, you have nothing to hold on to. Going to shower, nothing to hold on to. They should have it here, or make sure they get a grant for that.
Okay.
And I appreciate it if you could look into that.
Okay, thank
you.
you. Yes, I think that's a point. You know, it speaks. We heard over 25% of the survey respondents said that their current home needed a modification or a repair in order for it to be safe for them to live in as they age. And I think that speaks directly to your point of this idea of being able to help folks know what they need to change in their home to be safe. Maybe they don't necessarily even know what those things are. So helping them get some of that information as well as information about how to finance those changes could really improve the lives of some of those homeowners. I think that's great.
Hi, yes, I have another question, which is about, did you gather income information as well? It's interesting that you presented the data mostly in terms of age, but probably, I imagine if that was overlaid with income considerations for the different age groups. For example, looking ahead, what proportion of our seniors are likely to be in certain income categories that might change the assessment of the percentage that are in need of services, for example?
Yep. So we didn't ask survey respondents about their income because we know that question gets skipped quite a bit and we were pretty cramped for space on that survey. But we do have access to the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey information about household income. And we do present that by age in the report. And what you see is what we would imagine, what we see in other communities, which is when we look particularly at, I think, the lower income, so folks who have a household income of less than $25,000 a year, it's more than double in the 60 plus. So in terms of comparing folks under 60 versus folks who are in their older age groups, you see almost double the amount of people in that low income category. Certainly we know folks who have retired, for example, have fixed incomes and things like that. So certainly that is true here in Beverly.
Hi, my name is Carol Pelazzola, and I just wanted to say that I work at the PACE program at Element Care in Beverly, and it's really unique to Beverly because it takes care of elders, and you're talking about, 1 in 3 Beverly residents of 60 plus live alone, and half of them have disabilities that are over age 75. So we do help people stay independent at home, and the site in Beverly is the only one in Massachusetts with 2 gerontologists, doctors that take care of elderly. So specified for, the aging population.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of people just don't know about that either. So, because we're a pretty small nonprofit, but it's really helpful to seniors that want to stay home, want to stay in the community, and don't want to end up to a nursing home. So we're really lucky to have this right here in Beverly.
Thank you. Yes. So that was about the PACE program here in Beverly's, which is a wonderful model, and it sounds like you guys have great geriatricians and gerontologists there on staff, which is huge given what we know about the lack of those kinds of physicians in the country.
I'm very much in favor of all that's happening, though the scope of the need is seemingly extremely great. Wondered if any of your questions developed more into the organic aspect of people being cared for, neighborhood to neighbor, versus institution, which is wonderful, but the need is unknown, whereas your neighbor you might even know more about it and be very personally involved. If that was a question, and if therefore how that could be promoted from an institution point of view.
Yep. I think that's a fabulous point, and we asked 2 questions on the survey. One was, do you currently, the first one was, would you ask your neighbors for help if you needed some help with some kind of minor thing, maybe changing a light bulb or a task or an errand or something like that? And the second question was, so the first was, would you ask for help? And the second was, do you provide help? to your neighbors with some of these same kinds of tasks. And what we heard is actually more than I would have expected said yes, they would ask. I can't remember the percentages it's in the report and I can't remember the percentages off the top of my head, but a decent number of people said yes, I would ask for help. But when we asked, do you currently provide that help? We actually had quite a few people who said, no, I don't, but I would if I was asked. So I think it goes back to this simple idea of asking. You know, people, I think that the will is there, and that the people feel like they would help, but they don't feel like they necessarily have been asked. So I think but I think that your point about drawing on some of that neighborhood cohesion and neighbors helping neighbors could be a real huge asset in a community. And certainly the responses to those questions would lead me to believe that capacity is here in Beverly for people to help their neighbors. I don't know how you all feel as residents here, but that would be my perception. And so how do we leverage that and create some mechanisms for people to make that help? There is the village model of sort of communities where that is sort of the basis of it is neighbors helping neighbors. And that's a potential idea for residents to sort of band together. Yep.
Hi, Linnea Hegberg. I'm with Senior Care. We are the aging service access point for 9 cities and towns, including Beverly. So we're providing a lot of the in-home services. And first, this is really inspiring, and I, take away a lot. We're already working, I think, quite closely with the Beverly Council on Aging. But there's a lot of inspiration here to go farther. And I think one of the things, for example, our home delivered meals drivers, their feet on the ground and they're going into people's homes every single day, and what kind of partnerships can we be doing? We're already identifying if somebody, doesn't come to the door or something, but, how can we take that next step and look at some of the other areas, within HIPAA, I guess, regulations where we can see if somebody is in need of additional services. Mm-hmm. And I also want to throw one other, this is an aside on the welcome wagon concept, maybe take a page from AARP, and instead of welcoming people when they move to the community, you can do that, but maybe also when they turn 55 or 60 and mm-hmm. start to, maybe be eligible for some of the services that are done from here. And maybe come with a packet at that point in time as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Linnea. And I think to your first point about sort of how can or an organization like Senior Care, who's sort of a more regional organization, be involved in some of that, talking about communication across partners and ways that we can work together more closely and develop communication. That's a great avenue for opportunity, I think. Mary?
In regard to housing, I'm interested in knowing from some of the knowledgeable people here, how much is being planned in Beverly for the future for affordable housing? That seems to be a tremendous need.
Yep, so the general need of a lack of affordable housing here in Beverly, so people who may want to leave those big single-family homes, maybe not having necessarily even some options that are here in the community, and wanting to know how much of that, how that planning is being done.
Well, Harbor Light Community Partners has been a great advocate for housing for low income and seniors. Turtle Woods and Turtle Creek was their first venture into that. So I know that Mayor Cahill has been actively meeting with Andrew DeFranza, who's the executive director of Harbor Light Community Partners, and there are some projects in the works, and they are talking about it. And there's someone here from our planning department, and I don't know if you have something to say about housing and what you're working on, because I know you've also done a survey on housing needs.
So my name is Emily Hutchings. I'm the associate planner with the City of Beverly. I'm not personally working on these housing projects. I know my colleagues are. But I do know that Beverly has a very good percent of affordable housing. We have regulations in place where if you build a certain number of new units, you have to put some affordable housing. You have to, when you build a certain number of units, new units, you have to put a certain number of affordable units in with it. I believe we have about 12% of our housing is affordable. And so we're really working on strengthening that affordable housing aspect. That is a major city policy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
I want to thank you very much for being here tonight,
Oh.
and this afternoon. Are senior citizens considered low income?
No. No.
Well, I'm just saying, I can't believe that, because there's a lot of senior citizens can be valuable at that, can actually qualify for that
Yes.
situation.
So there are
Well, why
senior.
can't they be covered?
So some seniors certainly can or do fall into that low income category, but certainly not all, just because you're a senior citizen does not mean that you fall into the low income category.
Well,
Right.
that's
Yep.
to all fairness, all of us have paid our mortgage in our homes here. To all respect to the congressmen, the taxpayers and all that, it's not fair to carry our taxes for the city for 50 to 60 years. Now you want to enjoy your life. It's impossible to enjoy it. You're not very comfortable coming home.
Yeah.
Look at the percentage of women here. They're overpopulated than men. I'm sad to say that they live a little longer than men. I am very fortunate.
Yeah.
I've had a wonderful life, and I've paid my dues like everybody here. So I feel that we should be shared. We should think, well, geez, my taxes went up. Why am I have to move?
Right.
I know a friend of mine I met here the other day. I went to see her at the Beverly Commons. Now, the Beverly Commons was an apartment that she lived in there many years. She sold her house to go there because she wanted to stay in Beverly. New management takes over these big projects like the ones on Rantoul Street. $1,000 a month, $15,000 a month. If you're a senior, you can't go down there.
Yep.
But now this woman has looking for a place, and where she ended up? In Peabody. And all these years she lived in Beverly.
Yeah.
So what fairness is this government personnel consider? Why don't they say, okay, you paid taxes all those years, let's give you a break. There's no such thing.
Yeah.
My wife never missed a payment for 45 years. I live alone. I have a lovely daughter. She takes care of my bills.
Yep.
2 days ago, she got a bill from the city hall. She missed a payment. Alice never missed a payment in 40 years. Linda missed a payment for 2 days. The city I had to pay $25 more. Now that's not fair. That's not kindness. So I think the city should think of a lot of kindness to our senior citizens, like everybody else, like we do for the veterans. Look what we do for the veterans. We give them 10% off. We give them discharges. I got a GI loan to buy a house. But the city government has to do more for the seniors. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Absolutely. The 2 points from that, that I just wanted to touch on is this idea of we talk about affordable housing and affordability and what that means in terms of qualifying for things like affordable housing and what it really means for just people who are trying to afford their lives. And so thinking about, I think, to that point of this issue, that maybe not everybody qualifies for things like affordable housing, but they still have challenges related to affordability. And the other piece is to recognize, I think one of the sort of messages about aging, particularly population aging, people talk about the gray tsunami, they talk about all these people getting old. Well, the bottom line is that's a huge opportunity for our community. There's so much richness, so much effort, energy there. And so how do we as a city think about how do we capitalize on all of the wealth of information and knowledge that our seniors have and put it to good use?
Thank you. I just have a question about affordable housing and the new buildings that are going up in Beverly. Will there be an increase in the number of affordable housing units in all these buildings where the population is increasing for the 70 to 80 age group?
So that's a question about is there an increase in the number of units, affordable units for seniors in the new developments happening in Beverly? I do not know the answer to that. I don't know if our friend from planning does.
We can certainly check with the director of planning Aaron Clausen and find out.
Yep.
I think that Beverly has more affordable housing than they're required to by state law, which is awesome. But it's a very good question. As the population ages, will there be even more? So thank you for raising that.
Yes.
We probably have time for one more question, and then we have a brief activity at the table. So who has the last question?
Hi, my name's Corrine Hunter, and I live here in Beverly. I started coming to the senior center about 2 years ago, and I got right smack dab involved in the grandparent support group. It disappeared because of lack of funding. And I'm really hoping with all these recommendations that everybody's making that they reinstitute that again, because I'm sure there's a huge need out there in the community. Thank you.
That's an awesome plug, and it speaks directly to that informal caregiver need that we uncovered in this report. So thank you. The grandparents raising grandchildren.
Well, let's give a great big round of applause to Caitlin Coyle, who's worked so hard over the last 9 months on our behalf. And just when she thought she had a final draft, Jessica and I called her and said, we have a few more things we'd like to add in there. So thank you. Thank you for being patient with us as well as we went through this process. Our next steps is to actually do a strategic plan based on some of the recommendations that Caitlin has presented. But we also would like to hear from this crowd with your questions with what are the 3 things, most valuable lessons you learned from this presentation today? What are your 3 takeaways about growing older in Beverly? In your opinion, what do you think we should prioritize over the next, I think it's just 11 and a half years before 2030, when 1 in 3 people in Beverly will be 60 years old and older. And then if you have any other comments you want to share with us, we would love to hear those comments. We do our work based on what you tell us and what we know. And yes, we are a small staff of professionals, and we can't keep up with everybody and everything, but we have wonderful community partners. So, for example, Greg from Bootstraps is here today, and Bootstraps was able to get a grant to provide a mobile market right here at the senior center twice a month. And the last time we did it was last week. We had over how many people? Over 60 seniors who came to the mobile market and were able to bring home fresh produce and stable shelf products, and it's just so great to have partners. Beverly Hospital has been providing us with funding for an aging mastery program where people are actually coming to a 10-week class where they're learning about all the different aspects of aging. Beverly Hospital is also providing some of the funding for that mobile market, I believe. And we have an exercise class with the YMCA 3 days a week, and Beverly Hospital is funding that initiative as well. So thank you to our Beverly Hospital partners who are here today. Really appreciate that. And I'm probably missing some of our other wonderful partners, but we certainly do have wonderful community partners. We can't do this work alone. Somebody mentioned the neighbors and the neighborhoods, and that definitely is something that I always say. We count on neighbors looking out for neighbors and letting us know if they see a neighbor in trouble. My very first week on the job, I was picking up my daughter at her after-school program, and a neighbor said, "What are we going to do about the man on the corner who's hitting his wife with a cane?" I'm like, what? and that turned into filing a report with Senior Care, and Senior Care coming out and making an assessment that this wife had Alzheimer's disease, and her caregiving husband was chasing her when she was wandering with his cane. From that, my very first week on the job in 2005, I realized how important it was for neighbors to speak up and let us know when somebody's in trouble. And that couple actually got the help that they needed at that time. So I felt really good right off the bat working here that people would speak up and tell me when there was a problem. And that's what we hope from all of you. So thanks again to Caitlin. And we have some staff members around at your tables, but if you could just take 5 or 10 minutes to talk amongst yourself about the 3 questions that we've posed, and then have another snack on your way out, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.